Welcome to the preaching ministry of First Cumberland Presbyterian Church of Chattanooga. This recording is simply the sermon portion of our worship service. To experience our full worship service, we encourage you and invite you to join us Sunday morning at 11 in our beautiful sanctuary located at 1505 North Moore Road.
Just as we did last week, this week I want us to consider the Bible story that we use in our Day Players Day Camp. The character trait for the week this week was courage, and the character in the Bible that we use to display what it means to be faithful and to have courage was Esther. Now you likely know the story of Esther. It is an outsized story with a 180-day-long party, with a gallows erected that is more than 50 feet high, and a diabolical villain who wants nothing less than the entire genocide of a people. And standing in his way is a poor orphan girl who miraculously has been raised to the position of the queen of all of Persia. And yet to resist Haman, this diabolical demon, this diabolical person, she has to risk her very own life. It may be that she saves her people at the cost of her life. Her cousin and her father figure mentor Mordecai sends word to her and says, "You have to do this. Go before the king and plead on behalf of your people, or they all will be killed." And initially she resists. "I can't do that. If I go before the king without being summoned, I will be killed, and that will do nobody any good at all." And Mordecai's answer that comes back is one of those answers that has stood the test of time. You've probably heard sermons about it already in your life, as he says to her, "But who knows that perhaps you were raised to this high position for just such a time as this." For just such a time as this. Esther does go before the king because she recognizes, indeed, Mordecai is right. God has raised her to this spot. It is time for her to risk her life and put everything on the line for her people, and she does. And she saves her people, and her own life is spared. Haman, the villain, is the one who goes off to his just rewards. It's a great story. And how many sermons have been preached? How many sermons have I preached in which we have been exhorted to make sure that we are prepared, that if we need to put our lives on the line for our faith, particularly if it is putting our lives on the line for other people who cannot stand up for themselves, who cannot speak for themselves, and so we stand for them and we speak for them. There's that wonderful psalm that talks about the person standing in the gap, and we are called to stand in the gap for people who are oppressed or who are in need. And even if it means risking our own lives, we're called to do that. That's a good sermon. And that's a great sermon. And it's a wonderful thing that we need to be prepared to do. However, if you're like me, it can leave you a little bit distressed, maybe even in a little bit of despair. I'm not sure I would risk my life as Esther did. I'm not sure I would recognize that this was the moment that I was called, that this was exactly the time for which I had been raised so that I could do that. And even if I realized it, I don't know that I would have the courage to do it. And quite frankly, I'm not the queen, I'm not the king, I don't have an awful lot of power, so maybe that moment will never come for me at all. Does Esther have anything to say for the rest of us? And I think it does. There's another way to read this story. There's another way to hear that phrase, "for such a time as this." A wise minister once asked a group of people, "What do you think is the most important day in your life?" And one woman raised her hand and she said, "That's easy. The most important day of my life was the day that my daughter was born." And he said, "That's an important day, not the most important." Another said, "Well, it was the day that I graduated and finally was able to begin doing the things that I wanted to do." Again, a very important day, but not the most important day. The day I got married to the love of my life. Again, an important day, not the most important day. And finally, after the people had kind of almost given up offering suggestions, he said, "The most important day of your life is today. You see, yesterday is past. And regardless of whether there was good or bad, there's nothing you can do about that now. Tomorrow is only promised, but tomorrow is not even promised. It's only there, we hope. And any plans we have for tomorrow are dependent upon tomorrow coming. All we have is the gift of today. And that means today is the most important day that we have. And what we do with today is the most important thing we can possibly do with all of our lives. Now, it may be that today is the day for me to lay my life down for the good of others, for the gospel, for my faith. Or it may simply be that today is the day that I am to live my life as God has called me in more simple but no less powerful ways. David Griebner once wrote a wonderful short story called God's Gold. And he says that once upon a time there was an ordinary young man. And as a matter of fact, the only thing that was truly extraordinary about this young man was his great aunt. She was truly great in ways that neither you nor I could imagine. And since our young man had grown up and moved away from home, he hadn't spent much time with his great aunt. Actually, he hadn't seen her in years. And so we can understand then why he wasn't terribly upset when she died. However, he did become more interested when he learned that his aunt had remembered him in her will. Now, he didn't hope for much money from her because she'd always been known as a humble woman, far more generous than she was rich. But then again, one never knew. It might just be that she had wealth that no one imagined. His fantasies, which had become quite elaborate by the time that he arrived at the lawyer's, were dashed only slightly when he was given what his great aunt had left him. It was a key and a note. The note said that the key was to a room in her apartment, and it said that he could go to her apartment and take what was in the room if he wanted to. Well, what could it be? He went to the apartment, opened the room, and there in the room was a single table. And on the table sat a pure white pitcher, and next to the pitcher was another note. And other than these three items, the room was empty. Well, he picked up the note, and the note read, "In this pitcher is the gold of God. You may empty it once a day, and it will always be full the next. But take care, for there is only one vessel which will hold the gold long enough for it to be of any use to you." That was a strange note and a strange thing. He was rather disappointed, but then he looked down into the pitcher, and sure enough, there was some sort of a gold substance in there. Maybe this was a pitcher that would bring him great wealth. So he took the note and the pitcher, and he went home. And he got out a glass from his cabinet, and he poured the substance out of the pitcher, and sure enough, a golden liquid poured out of the pitcher into the glass. But almost as soon as it hit the bottom of the glass, it dissipated away and it was gone, almost as if the glass had a hole in the bottom of it. He thought, what single vessel might hold this gold? Well, maybe metal would hold metal. And so the next day he poured it into a metal pan, but again it dissipated as soon as it hit the bottom pan. He tried many different vessels, many different cups, many different varieties of things. He even one time snuck into the church and poured it into the chalice there on the altar table. But every time it disappeared and it did not refill until sometime late in the night, and the next morning it would be there again. One day he had this slender Chinese vase, and he was trying to pour it in and accidentally spilled some of the gold on his hand. And he was startled. He hadn't thought about what would happen if some of it got on him. And as he looked at his hand, he realized that just like the other pitchers and the other vessels, it had immediately disappeared once it hit his hand. And yet he could feel a warmth there. And there was a slight glow to his skin. Late that night, he got an idea. And the next morning, before he could talk himself out of it, he grabbed the pitcher and picked it up, and he drank every bit of that gold liquid that was there in the pitcher. When he died many years later, some of his friends remarked how his life had changed shortly after his great aunt had died. Others could only say that he had shone like the sun for him, that he had lifted their faith in more than one occasion. Others even called him a saint. His great niece, who hadn't seen him for years, simply wondered what could be the meaning of the note that he left her and the key that was there in the lawyer's office when she went to find out what she had inherited from his will. That gold, God's gold, is, of course, love. It is faith. It is courage. And it plays out each and every day. When we pray, give us this day our daily bread, we're not simply asking for things that bring our body sustenance, but we're asking God to give us enough for today of faith, of love, of courage, to make today count. To live today as if it is the most important day of our lives, because it is. My guess is that is actually how Esther lived her life. We get that incredible moment when she has to make that incredible decision, but all of the other days in her life led up to that. And because she had been a person of faith and of love, and had been testing her courage in different ways each and every day, when the time came when she needed it to be there for her the most, it was there. But had that day never come, she would have lived her life in love and in faith, and would have made a difference in the lives of those around her. And so let us take great inspiration from Esther. Let us steel ourselves and prepare ourselves should the day come when we have to stand in the gap. Should the day come when we need to put our lives on the line for others, that we would be willing to do that we would have the courage and the love and the grace to do that. But even perhaps more importantly, let us accept the gift of God's gold this day and use it this day in ways that may be simpler but are no less powerful. Amen.
Thank you for joining us for this message from the preaching ministry of First Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Once more, we hope you'll join us in person Sunday at 11 a.m. for worship.